The blood on Xander Daniels' hands wouldn't wash away. Not with river water, not with whiskey, and certainly not with time. He scrubbed them raw in the basin outside the saloon in Winslow, Arizona Territory, 1876, while the setting sun painted the desert landscape in hues of amber and crimson that reminded him too much of things he'd rather forget. "You planning on taking the skin clean off, mister?" The barkeep had stepped outside, cigarette dangling from his lips as he observed Xander's vigorous washing. Xander straightened, water dripping from his weathered hands. At 32, the lines around his eyes told stories his mouth never would. "Just getting trail dust off." "Sure." The barkeep nodded knowingly. Trail dust. The small town of Winslow hadn't been Xander's destination. No place ever was these days. He simply rode until his horse needed rest or his supplies ran low. 3 years of wandering the Western Territories had taught him that all towns were essentially the same places to replenish, perhaps earn some money, and inevitably leave before anyone asked too many questions. He dried his hands on his worn denim pants and adjusted the gun belt that sat low on his hips. The Colt Peacemaker wasn't for show, its handle worn smooth from years of use. In his saddlebag rested a Winchester rifle, equally well used. "Got a room available?" Xander asked, following the barkeep back inside. $2 a night includes breakfast." The man slid a key across the bar. "Name's Murphy. You passing through or staying a spell?" "Passing through." "Always passing through. Figured as much. You got that look." Murphy poured a whiskey without being asked. "On the house. You look like you could use it." Xander nodded his thanks and tossed back the amber liquid in one practiced motion. The burn was familiar, comforting in its consistency. "Any work around for a few days?" Murphy stroked his graying beard. "Might be. Williams Ranch outside town lost their foreman last month. Old man Williams has been struggling to keep things running. Heard he's looking for experienced hands. Might look into it." Xander placed the empty glass down and took the key. "Much obliged." He climbed the narrow staircase to the second floor, his spurs jingling with each step. The room was sparse but clean: a bed, washstand, and small window overlooking the main street. Xander removed his hat, revealing dark hair streaked with premature gray at the temples. Sleep came reluctantly, as it always did. When it finally arrived, it brought the faces with it: men he'd killed, graves he'd dug, lives he'd ended. Some had deserved it, others hadn't. After a while, the distinction had begun to blur. Dawn broke clear and cold over Winslow. Xander rode out to Williams Ranch just as the sun crested the horizon. The property sprawled across several acres, cattle dotting the landscape. The main house was modest but well-maintained, with a large barn and several outbuildings nearby. An older man with a full white beard was instructing 2 young cowboys when Xander approached. He looked up, squinting against the morning light. "Help you, stranger." His voice was gruff but not unfriendly. Xander dismounted. "Name's Xander Daniels. Heard you might be looking for experienced hands." The old man assessed him with shrewd eyes. "Edwin Williams. You worked cattle before?" "Yes, sir. Grew up on a ranch in Texas. Worked spreads in Colorado, New Mexico, and Texas." "What brings you to Arizona?" Xander's face remained impassive. "Just riding." Williams seemed to accept this. "Can you break horses?" "Yes, sir." "Mend fence?" "Yes, sir." "Handle a gun?" A fractional hesitation. "When necessary." Williams nodded. $2 a day plus room and board. Got a bunkhouse for the hands. Work starts at dawn, ends when the job's done. Fair enough. "There's one more thing," Williams said, his expression darkening. "We've had trouble with rustlers. Lost 20 head last month. My foreman was killed trying to stop them." Xander's jaw tightened. "Sorry to hear that." Sheriff's been useless. Says he doesn't have the men to patrol outside town. Williams spat on the ground. I'm not asking you to be a gunslinger, but any man who works for me needs to be willing to protect what's ours. Xander nodded. He'd hoped to avoid trouble, but trouble had a way of finding him regardless. I understand. Good. You can start today. Jenkins will show you around. Williams gestured to one of the young cowboys who approached with an easy grin. Welcome aboard, Jenkins said. You picked a busy time. Roundup's coming and we're short-handed. The work was hard but familiar. Xander's muscles remembered what to do, even after months of drifting. There was something honest about ranch work, the simplicity of purpose, the immediate rewards of effort. By the end of the day, his hands were blistered and his back ached, but his mind was quieter. The bunkhouse was comfortable enough, with 8 bunks though only 5 were occupied. The men were curious about the newcomer but not intrusive. Xander volunteered little about himself, and they didn't press. A week passed uneventfully. Xander fell into the rhythm of ranch life, rising before dawn and working until dusk. The nightmares still came, but less frequently, exhaustion providing some relief from his ghosts. On Saturday night, most of the hands rode into town. Xander joined them, more out of a desire to replenish supplies than for companionship. They entered Murphy's saloon, now bustling with Saturday night revelers. "First rounds on me, boys," Jenkins announced, approaching the bar where a young woman was serving drinks. Xander hung back, taking a corner table with a clear view of the door, an old habit he couldn't break. From his vantage point, he observed the room. Cowboys, miners, a few well-dressed businessmen, and the working girls who moved among them. The piano player hammered out a lively tune that barely rose above the din of conversation and laughter. His attention was drawn to the bar, where the woman serving drinks wasn't dressed like the other girls. Her dress was modest, her manner businesslike as she efficiently filled orders. When she smiled, it transformed her face, lighting up features that might otherwise have been considered merely pleasant. Jenkins noticed his gaze. "That's Josephine Keating," he said, placing a whiskey in front of Xander. "Murphy's niece. Came out from Boston about 6 months ago after her parents died. Fever, I heard." "She doesn't seem to fit in a place like this," Xander observed. Jenkins chuckled. "Don't let the proper appearance fool you. She's got more spine than most men I know. Some drunken miner got handsy last month. She broke his nose with a whiskey bottle." He sipped his drink. "Murphy's teaching her the business. Word is he plans to leave her the saloon when he retires." Xander nodded, his eyes still on Josephine. As if sensing his gaze, she looked up, meeting his eyes across the room. Neither smiled nor looked away for a long moment. Then someone called for a drink, and she turned back to her work. The evening progressed predictably. Men drank, boasted, occasionally argued. Xander nursed his whiskey, declining offers to join card games or more rowdy entertainments. Around midnight, the saloon doors swung open to admit a group of men whose demeanor immediately changed the atmosphere. They were clearly not locals, their clothes too fine, their manner too arrogant. The leader was a tall man with a carefully trimmed mustache and expensive boots that had seen little actual trail work. He surveyed the room with the air of someone accustomed to deference. Conversations quieted. Murphy emerged from the back room, his expression wary. "Mr. Blackburn," he acknowledged, "didn't expect to see you in town." "Just passing through," Blackburn replied smoothly. "Thought we'd enjoy some hospitality." His gaze swept the room, lingering on Josephine. "The finest Winslow has to offer." Murphy moved subtly to position himself between Blackburn and his niece. "We're about to close for the night." "Oh, I think you can stay open a little longer." Blackburn's smile didn't reach his eyes. For your best customers." The tension in the room was palpable. Xander watched as the ranch hands exchanged glances, their hands drifting toward their weapons. "These men work for Edward Blackburn," Jenkins whispered. "Owns the Big B ranch north of here. Been trying to buy out all the smaller spreads, including Williams. And when people don't sell?" Xander asked quietly. Jenkins' expression was grim. "Accidents happen. Blackburn and his men commandeered a large table, loudly demanding service. Josephine brought their drinks, her face a careful mask of professional courtesy. Blackburn caught her wrist as she turned to leave. "Why don't you join us, darling?" His voice carried across the now quiet room. "Pretty girl like you shouldn't be just serving drinks." "Thank you, but I have work to do," she replied evenly, trying to withdraw her hand. His grip tightened. "I'm offering you better work." The lady said no. Xander hadn't intended to speak, but the words came anyway. Blackburn looked up, his expression darkening when he saw Xander. "I don't believe anyone asked for your opinion, Cowboy." Xander stood slowly, aware of Blackburn's men watching him. "Let her go." A tense silence followed. Then Blackburn released Josephine's wrist, his movement deliberately casual. "No need for unpleasantness. We're all just having a good time." Josephine retreated behind the bar, rubbing her wrist. Murphy placed a protective hand on her shoulder, his face tight with anger. "I think it's time you and your men moved on, Blackburn," he said firmly. "Is that so?" Blackburn's eyes narrowed. "This establishment seems unwelcoming. Perhaps the town council should reconsider your liquor license." "That would be unfortunate," Xander said, moving closer. "Especially since the sheriff might be interested in those cattle with altered brands I noticed in your north pasture yesterday." It was a bluff. Xander had no idea what was in Blackburn's pastures, but it hit its mark. Blackburn's face flushed with anger. "You're making a mistake, stranger," he said quietly. "You don't want me as an enemy." "I've had worse," Xander replied evenly. For a moment it seemed Blackburn might escalate the confrontation. Then he laughed, the sound without humor. "Come on, boys. There are friendlier establishments elsewhere." He rose, adjusting his expensive coat. "We'll remember this." The tension in the room eased only slightly as Blackburn and his men departed. Murphy sighed heavily, pouring himself a generous whiskey. "You shouldn't have done that," he told Xander. "Blackburn doesn't forget slights." "Neither do I." Xander returned to his table, aware of the speculative glances from the other patrons. As the night wore on, the crowd thinned. Xander remained, not quite ready to return to the bunkhouse and the dreams that awaited him. He was staring into his empty glass when a fresh whiskey appeared before him. "Thank you," Josephine Keating said softly, placing the drink on the table. "For earlier." Up close, her eyes were a clear blue, direct and intelligent. Her brown hair was pulled back in a simple style that emphasized the clean lines of her face. "No thanks necessary," Xander replied. She hesitated, then sat across from him. "You're new, working at Williams' ranch, for now. I'm Josephine Keating. Most people call me Joe." "Xander Daniels." She studied him with curiosity. "You're not like the other ranch hands. What makes you say that? The way you watch everything? The way you move?" Her gaze was perceptive. "You're careful, like someone who's been hunted." Xander's expression revealed nothing. "You're very observant, Miss Keating." "Joe," she corrected. "And when you live in a saloon, you learn to read people quickly." She glanced toward Murphy, who was watching them with poorly concealed interest. "My uncle's protective, but he can't always be around." "I've learned to spot trouble before it finds me." "And what do you see when you look at me?" Xander asked, genuinely curious. She considered him for a moment. "Someone running from something or someone." She smiled slightly. "But then, who isn't out here? The West is full of people trying to outrun their pasts. Before he could respond, Jenkins approached their table. "We're heading back to the ranch, Daniels. You coming?" Xander nodded, finishing his drink. "Miss Keating," he acknowledged with a slight tip of his hat. "Mr. Daniels." Her smile was warm. "Perhaps I'll see you next Saturday." "Perhaps." He followed Jenkins out, feeling her gaze on his back. The ride back to the ranch was quiet, the men tired from a day's work and an evening's drinking. Xander's thoughts kept returning to Josephine Keating, her directness, her perceptiveness. It had been a long time since a woman had looked at him with anything other than wariness or professional interest. The following days passed in a blur of cattle work and fence mending. Xander kept to himself, though he was less withdrawn than before. The other hand seemed to have developed a new respect for him after the incident with Blackburn. On Wednesday, Williams called Xander to the main house. "I heard about what happened in town," he said without preamble. "Blackburn's not a man to cross lightly. So I've been told." Williams studied him. "Jenkins says you can handle yourself, says you stood up to Blackburn without even touching your gun." He paused. "Who'd you ride with before, Daniels?" "No one you'd know, law or outlaw." Xander met his gaze steadily. "Does it matter?" Williams considered this. "I suppose not, as long as you're straight with me now." He sighed. "My foreman's position is still open. The men respect you. The pay's $3 a day and you get the foreman's cabin instead of the bunkhouse." The offer was unexpected. "I appreciate it, but I'm not staying long." "None of us are, son," Williams said with the wisdom of age. "But while you're here, you might as well be useful." He held out his hand. "What do you say?" Xander hesitated, then shook it. "I'll do my best for you, but I won't make promises about how long I'll stay." "Fair enough." Williams nodded. "You can move your things to the cabin today." The foreman's cabin was small but private, a luxury Xander hadn't experienced in months. It had a bed, table, stove, and a small bookshelf stocked with dime novels and a Bible. He unpacked his meager possessions, including a tin-type photograph of a young woman he placed face down in a drawer. His new responsibilities kept him busy. Williams ran a tight operation, but the loss of cattle to rustlers had put them behind schedule for the upcoming cattle drive. Xander reorganized the work schedules, assigned the best men to night guard duty, and personally rode the boundaries each evening. On Saturday, he rode into town alone, ostensibly to purchase supplies but with the unacknowledged hope of seeing Josephine again. The general store provided what he needed: ammunition, tobacco, a new shirt to replace one torn beyond repair. As he loaded his purchases onto his horse, he noticed a familiar figure across the street. Josephine was emerging from the dressmaker's shop, a package tucked under her arm. She wore a simple blue dress, her hair partially covered by a modest bonnet. In the daylight, away from the saloon, she looked even more out of place in the rough frontier town, a reminder that the West was still young, still being shaped by those who ventured into its wilds. She spotted him and smiled, crossing the dusty street. "Mr. Daniels, I heard you've been promoted to foreman. News travels fast. Small town." She adjusted her package. "Are you settling in then, for now?" "Well, congratulations." She glanced at the sky. "Perfect day for a ride, isn't it? I was just about to take my horse out." "I don't get many opportunities during the week." The invitation was clear, though unstated. Xander should have declined getting involved with anyone, even casually, wasn't part of his plan. But something about Josephine Keating made him reconsider. "I haven't seen much of the area," he said. "Might be nice to explore a bit." Her smile widened. "There's a lovely spot by the creek about an hour's ride south, if you're interested in company." "Let me just drop these supplies at the livery," he said, surprising himself. An hour later they rode side by side along a well-worn trail. Josephine was an excellent horsewoman, sitting her mare with the ease of long practice. "You didn't learn to ride like that in Boston," Xander observed. She laughed, the sound bright in the clear air. "No, I grew up on a small farm in Pennsylvania. My father taught me to ride before I could walk properly." Her expression grew wistful. "He and my mother moved to Boston for his work when I was 16. I stayed with them until they passed last year. I'm sorry for your loss." "Thank you." She guided her horse around a rocky outcropping. "Uncle Murphy is my mother's brother. He wrote after they died, offering me a place to stay. I had nowhere else to go, and I was curious about the West." She smiled ruefully. "It's quite different from what the novels describe." "Usually is," Xander agreed. "What about you? Where are you from originally?" "Texas. Hill country. Family still there?" "No." His tone discouraged further questions. They rode in companionable silence until the trail opened onto a small clearing beside a creek. Cottonwood trees provided shade and wildflowers dotted the grass. "It's beautiful," Xander said, genuinely impressed. "My sanctuary." Josephine dismounted gracefully. "I come here when town life becomes overwhelming." They secured their horses and settled beneath a large cottonwood. Josephine produced a small bundle from her saddlebag: bread, cheese, and apples. "I thought you might be hungry," she explained, offering him an apple. "Thank you." He accepted it, watching as she arranged the simple meal between them. "Why are you being kind to me, Miss Keating?" "Joe," she corrected automatically. "And why shouldn't I be? Most people keep their distance from men like me." "Men like you?" She raised an eyebrow. "You mean men who stand up to bullies like Blackburn? Men who work hard and mind their own business?" "You know that's not what I mean." She met his gaze directly. "I know there's more to you than whatever you're running from, Mr. Daniels." "Xander," he said quietly. "Xander," she smiled. "I've learned to trust my instincts about people. They rarely lead me astray." They ate in silence for a while, listening to the gentle sound of the creek and the birds overhead. It was peaceful in a way Xander hadn't experienced in years. "Tell me about Boston," he said finally. "What's it like?" Her face lit up as she described the city, its buildings, theaters, the harbor with ships from around the world. She spoke of concerts and lectures, bookshops and parks. Her enthusiasm was infectious, painting a vivid picture of a world far removed from the dusty streets of Winslow. "You miss it?" he asked when she paused. "Parts of it," she admitted. "The culture, the opportunities for learning, but not the restrictions." She plucked a blade of grass, twirling it between her fingers. "Women have very prescribed roles there. Here there's more flexibility." "Is that why you stay? Freedom?" "Partly." She looked at him thoughtfully. "And partly because I've grown fond of this place despite its roughness, or perhaps because of it. There's an honesty here that I appreciate." "The West can be brutal," Xander warned. "That honesty comes with a price." "I'm aware." Her expression sobered. "I've seen enough in 6 months to understand that. But I've also seen kindness and courage that would surprise most Easterners." They talked until the sun began its descent, sharing observations about Winslow and its inhabitants, carefully avoiding personal histories. Xander found himself relaxing in her company, his customary vigilance easing slightly. As they prepared to leave, Josephine hesitated. "The town is hosting a dance next Saturday to raise funds for the schoolhouse." She busied herself with her saddlebag. "Will you be attending?" "I'm not much for dancing," Xander admitted. "Neither am I, really." She mounted her horse with fluid grace, but it might be pleasant to have a friend there. He considered her, framed against the setting sun, her expression hopeful but not demanding. "I might stop by," he said finally. Her smile was worth the concession. They rode back to town as twilight descended, the conversation easy between them. At the edge of town, Xander felt a familiar prickle of unease, the sensation of being watched. He scanned the darkening streets but saw nothing obviously amiss. Something wrong? Josephine asked, noticing his tension. Just cautious, he replied, his hand drifting closer to his revolver. He escorted her to the saloon, remaining mounted as she dismounted. "Thank you for the afternoon," he said formally, aware of curious eyes from the saloon's windows. "Thank you for the company." She smiled up at him. "Until next Saturday, then, perhaps." He tipped his hat and turned his horse, feeling the weight of her gaze as he rode away. The feeling of being watched persisted as he left town. Twice he changed direction unexpectedly, listening for following hoofbeats, but heard nothing. Still, years on the run had honed his instincts, and they rarely led him astray. Someone had taken an interest in him and in his experience that never boded well. At the ranch, he checked in with the night guards before retiring to his cabin. As he lit the lamp, his gaze fell on the drawer containing the tin type. He hesitated, then opened it, removing the photograph and studying the young woman's face, familiar features now softened by time and memory. "I'm sorry, Sarah," he whispered, touching the image gently before returning it to the drawer. That night, his dreams were a confused tangle of past and present, Sarah's face blending with Josephine's, gunfire and screams giving way to the gentle sound of a creek. He woke before dawn, unsettled but rested. The week passed quickly. Xander threw himself into his duties, organizing the men efficiently and earning William's approval. By day, he focused on the ranch's operations. By night, his thoughts drifted increasingly to Josephine Keating. Her directness, her intelligence, her evident strength, all qualities that drew him despite his best intentions. On Thursday, while inspecting the north pasture with Jenkins and 2 other hands, they discovered fresh tracks, several horses and cattle moving eastward toward the territorial border. "Rustlers," Jenkins confirmed grimly. "Looks like they took at least 10 head. Xander studied the tracks. Not more than a day old. 4, maybe 5 men. He pointed to a distinctive horseshoe print. "That one's got a chip in the front right shoe. Think we can catch them?" asked one of the younger hands eagerly. "No." Xander's tone brooked no argument. "We report this to Williams and the sheriff. No heroics." "Sheriff won't do anything," Jenkins muttered. "Never does. Then we'll increase the night patrols and set up a proper watch schedule." Xander mounted his horse. "Let's head back." Williams took the news stoically. "Expected as much. Blackburn's been quiet too long." "You think it's him?" Xander asked. "Who else? He wants my land, and he's not above stealing me blind to get it." Williams sighed heavily. "My son would have known how to handle this before he went off to that damned war." It was the first mention Williams had made of a son. "He didn't return." Gettysburg. Williams' face was etched with old grief. This was meant to be his ranch someday. Now, he shrugged. "Just trying to hold on until I can find a fair buyer. Won't let Blackburn have it, though, not after everything." Xander nodded, understanding the old man's determination. "We'll stop the rustling, Mr. Williams. I promise you that." Saturday arrived clear and cool, perfect weather for the town dance. Xander spent the morning organizing the new patrol schedules, then surprised himself by taking extra care with his appearance before riding into town. He'd purchased a new shirt in town and wore his least worn pair of jeans. He even trimmed his beard, a concession to vanity he rarely indulged. The town hall had been transformed for the occasion, with lanterns strung across the ceiling and tables laden with food prepared by the local women. A small band, fiddle, guitar, and piano played lively tunes as couples whirled across the wooden floor. Xander entered self-consciously, nodding to familiar faces. He'd almost decided the entire idea was a mistake when he spotted Josephine across the room. She wore a dress of deep green that complemented her coloring, her hair arranged more elaborately than he'd seen before. She was speaking with an older woman but looked up as if sensing his presence. Her smile as she approached made the discomfort of the crowd worthwhile. "You came," she said, genuine pleasure in her voice, said I might. He felt awkward suddenly, out of place among the townspeople. "You look very nice." "Thank you." She glanced at the dancers. "Would you care to dance? I promise I'm not very good." "Then we're well matched," he replied, offering his arm. The dance was a simple waltz, one Xander vaguely remembered from his youth. Josephine moved gracefully in his arms, her hand warm in his, her waist slender beneath his other hand. They moved somewhat stiffly at first, then with increasing confidence as they found their rhythm together. "You're better than you claimed," she observed, eyes twinkling. "My mother insisted all her children learn, said it was a civilized skill." She was right. Josephine's expression was curious. "You had siblings?" A brief shadow crossed his face. "Two brothers, both gone now." She squeezed his hand gently. "I'm sorry. It was a long time ago." The music changed to a livelier tune, and they separated by mutual, unspoken agreement. Xander escorted her to the refreshment table, where Murphy was serving punch with a liberal addition of whiskey for those who requested it. "Daniels," he acknowledged with a nod. "Didn't expect to see you here." "Uncle," Josephine chided gently. "Be nice." "Mr. Daniels was kind enough to dance with me." Murphy's expression softened. "Can't blame a man for wanting to dance with the prettiest girl in the room." He filled 2 cups with punch. "Enjoy yourselves, but not too much," he added with a pointed look at Xander. They found a relatively quiet corner where they could observe the festivities while conversing. "Your uncle is protective," Xander noted, "exceedingly so." She sipped her punch. "Though I can hardly blame him. A single woman in a frontier town is a target for all sorts of unwanted attention." "Like Blackburn's," her expression darkened. "Yes, he's been persistent. Seems to think the saloon would make a fine addition to his holdings." She met Xander's gaze directly. "With or without me included." Anger flared in Xander's chest. "Has he threatened you?" "Not explicitly." "He's too clever for that." She set her cup down. "But his intentions are clear enough. Uncle Murphy has refused to sell, of course. That's made things tense." Before Xander could respond, the town sheriff approached their corner. He was a portly man with a drooping mustache and an air of perpetual exhaustion. "Miss Keating," he nodded politely, then turned to Xander. "You're William's new foreman, right? Daniels." "That's right. Heard you reported more rustling." The sheriff sighed. "Wish I could help, but I've got no deputies and 20 miles of territory to cover." "We'll handle it," Xander said, his tone making it clear he expected little from the law. The sheriff seemed relieved. "Just don't go causing trouble, you understand. Last thing we need is a range war." "Interesting advice from a lawman," Xander observed coolly. The sheriff bristled. "Now see here, Sheriff Peterson," Josephine interrupted smoothly. "I believe Mrs. Sanders was looking for you. Something about judging the pie contest." Peterson glanced between them, then nodded stiffly. "Right. Well, evening to you both." He moved away, his back rigid with injured dignity. "That wasn't diplomatic," Josephine murmured once he was out of earshot. "I'm not known for diplomacy." Xander watched the sheriff's retreating figure. He's either incompetent or corrupt. Neither inspires confidence. "Probably both," she agreed. "Blackburn contributes generously to his re-election fund." She touched Xander's arm lightly. "But tonight isn't for worrying about Blackburn or rustlers. It's for dancing." Her touch was like a brand through his shirt sleeve, warm and distracting. He looked down at her, at the curve of her smile and the invitation in her eyes, and felt something long dormant stir within him. "I'm not the man you think I am, Joe." he said softly. I think you're exactly the man I think you are, she replied, meeting his gaze steadily. And I'd like another dance. The evening passed in a pleasant blur of dancing, conversation, and laughter. Xander found himself relaxing in Josephine's company, sharing stories from his youth in Texas, while carefully avoiding the darker chapters of his life. She was an attentive listener, asking insightful questions and offering observations that revealed her intelligence and wit. As the night drew to a close, Xander escorted her back to the saloon. The streets were quiet, most of the town still at the dance or already abed. Thank you for a lovely evening, she said as they reached the saloon side entrance. I can't remember when I've enjoyed myself more. The pleasure was mine, he replied, meaning it. She hesitated, then looked up at him with a directness that took his breath away. Would you like to come in for coffee? Uncle Murphy won't be back for hours. He's overseeing the cleanup. Xander knew he should decline. Getting involved with anyone, especially someone like Josephine, was a complication he couldn't afford. Yet the thought of returning to his empty cabin held little appeal compared to a few more hours in her company. Coffee would be nice, he said finally. She led him through the darkened saloon to a small apartment at the back. It was modestly but comfortably furnished, with touches that were unmistakably feminine: curtains at the windows, a colorful quilt on the settee, books stacked neatly on every available surface. Please make yourself comfortable, she said, moving to the small stove. I'll just be a moment. Xander removed his hat, feeling strangely self-conscious. He examined the books while she prepared the coffee, novels mostly, but also works of history, science, and poetry. On a small table near the window sat a photograph in a silver frame, a middle-aged couple with Josephine's eyes and smile. My parents, she said, bringing 2 cups of coffee to the small table. That was taken just before they fell ill. You favor your mother, he observed, accepting the cup gratefully. Yes, though I have my father's temperament, according to Uncle Murphy. She sat across from him. Stubborn and too curious for my own good. Admirable qualities, Xander said, finding himself smiling. Not everyone agrees. She sipped her coffee, studying him over the rim. Especially not for a woman. The West is changing, he said. Women like you are part of that change. And men like you, he considered her question. I'm not sure what part I play anymore. You stood up for me against Blackburn, she pointed out. You're helping Mr. Williams protect his ranch. Those aren't the actions of a man without purpose. They're temporary measures, he said. I won't be staying in Winslow. Why not? The question was direct, challenging. Xander set his cup down carefully. I don't stay anywhere long. It's safer that way. Safer for whom? Everyone. His voice was quiet but firm. She leaned forward, her expression earnest. What are you running from, Xander? For a moment, he considered telling her everything: the bloody trail that led from Texas to Arizona, the men who might still be hunting him, the nightmares that woke him in a cold sweat. Instead, he shook his head. It's better you don't know. I disagree. Her eyes held his. I think secrets fester like wounds. Sometimes they need air to heal. Some wounds never heal, he said, his voice rougher than intended. And some secrets are better buried. Like the men you've killed. The question hung between them, stark and unavoidable. Xander felt a chill run down his spine. What do you know about that? Nothing specific, she admitted. But I see how you carry yourself, how you watch doorways and windows, the way your hand never strays far from your gun. She reached across the table, her fingers brushing his. And I see the ghosts in your eyes, Xander, the weight of the graves behind you. Her perception was unnerving. Most people saw what they wanted to see: a quiet cowboy, perhaps with a rough past but nothing extraordinary. Josephine saw deeper, and that made her dangerous. If you see all that, he said carefully. "Why aren't you afraid of me? Should I be?" Most would say yes, she considered this. "I don't believe you'd hurt me, beyond that." She shrugged slightly. "We all have pasts, Xander. Some bloodier than others, perhaps, but few of us reach adulthood with clean hands." Her understanding was more disarming than fear would have been. Xander found himself wanting to trust her, a dangerous impulse he'd learned to suppress. "You're an unusual woman, Josephine Keating." "So I've been told." Her smile was warm, often not as a compliment. It was meant as one. The conversation shifted to lighter topics: books they'd read, places they'd seen, the peculiarities of Winslow's inhabitants. Time passed comfortably, the coffee cooling forgotten as they talked. When the mantel clock struck midnight, Xander realized with surprise how late it had grown. "I should go," he said reluctantly. "It's late and Murphy will be returning soon." She nodded, walking him to the door. "Will I see you again? Outside of the saloon, I mean." The prudent answer would have been no. Instead, he heard himself say, "I'd like that." Her smile was worth the risk. "The creek next Saturday, same time. I'll be there." At the doorway they paused, suddenly awkward. Josephine looked up at him, her expression soft in the lamplight. For a brief, mad moment, Xander considered kissing her. Instead, he took her hand and pressed it gently. "Good night, Joe." "Good night, Xander. Ride safely." The night air was cool against his face as he rode back to the ranch, his thoughts in pleasant disarray. For the first time in years, he found himself looking forward rather than over his shoulder, a dangerous luxury for a man with his past. The ranch was quiet when he arrived, the bunkhouse dark save for a single lamp in the window signaling all was well. Xander stabled his horse and walked to the foreman's cabin, his footsteps crunching on the gravel path. He was reaching for the door when instinct made him pause. Something was wrong. The night was too quiet, the shadows too still. He drew his revolver silently, stepping to the side of the door rather than standing directly before it. "Whoever's there," he called evenly, "best speak up now." Silence greeted him, but the sense of wrongness persisted. Slowly, gun raised, he pushed the door open with his foot. The interior was dark, undisturbed. He struck a match, lit the lamp, and surveyed the small space. Nothing seemed amiss until his gaze fell on the drawer where he kept Sarah's photograph. It was slightly ajar, though he distinctly remembered closing it. With growing unease, he crossed to the dresser and pulled the drawer open. The tintype was still there, but it had been moved turned face up when he always kept it face down. Someone had been in his cabin, looking through his things. Someone who wanted him to know they'd been there. Xander spent a restless night, alert to every sound. By morning, he'd reached a decision. After breakfast, he approached Williams in the ranch office. "Someone was in my cabin last night," he said without preamble. "Going through my things." Williams frowned. "One of the hands, don't think so." "None of them have reason to search my belongings." "Blackburn's men, maybe," Williams suggested. "After you spoke up for Miss Keating, he might have taken an interest in you. Possibly." Xander hesitated. "Or it could be someone else. Someone looking for me specifically." Williams studied him shrewdly. "You want to tell me what kind of trouble you're in, son?" Xander considered how much to reveal. "I used to ride with a man named Victor Reeves. Ever heard of him?" Williams' expression darkened. "The gunslinger." "Heard he killed 20 men before the law caught up to him in Colorado." 23, Xander corrected grimly. "I was his right hand for 3 years, did things I'm not proud of." "What happened?" "We took a job that went bad. Very bad." Xander's face was expressionless, but his eyes reflected old horrors. "A family died that shouldn't have. After that, I couldn't do it anymore. Turned myself in to a federal marshal, agreed to testify against Reeves and his remaining men." "And did you?" "Yes." "Reeves was hanged 2 years ago in Denver." Xander's jaw tightened. But he had friends, powerful ones. They've been hunting me ever since. Williams absorbed this silently. And you think they've found you here? I think someone has. Whether it's Reeves' old associates or Blackburn's men, I can't say for certain. What will you do? It was the question Xander had been asking himself all night. The answer had always been simple before move on, find a new place, a new identity, keep running. But now, I'm not sure, he admitted, but I wanted you to know, if trouble comes looking for me, it might find the ranch too. Williams nodded slowly. I appreciate your honesty. He rose, pacing to the window. My son used to say a man's character isn't defined by his mistakes, but by what he does after making them. He turned back to Xander. You've been straight with me, worked hard. That counts for something in my book. Thank you, sir. Just be careful, Williams advised, and keep an eye out. If Blackburn's involved, he won't stop at intimidation. The next few days passed without incident, though Xander remained vigilant. He reorganized the night patrols, placing the most experienced hands at vulnerable points along the ranch boundaries. During the day, he rode the perimeter himself, looking for signs of intruders or rustlers. On Wednesday, one of the young hands rode in with news a small herd of cattle had been spotted in a box canyon 10 miles east, bearing what appeared to be altered Williams Ranch brands. How many men guarding them? Xander asked. Just 2 that I could see, the young cowboy reported eagerly. We could take him easy. No. Xander's tone was firm. You did right reporting this. Now go get Jenkins and meet me at the barn in 10 minutes. Williams agreed with Xander's plan to investigate but not confront the rustlers directly. If they're Blackburn's men, any confrontation could escalate quickly, he cautioned. Better to gather evidence for the territorial marshal. Xander, Jenkins, and 2 experienced hands rode out at midday, carrying enough supplies for an overnight stay if necessary. They approached the canyon cautiously, dismounting a mile away and proceeding on foot to avoid detection. From a ridge overlooking the canyon, they observed the scene below. 20 head of cattle grazed in the natural corral formed by the canyon walls. 2 men sat by a small fire, rifles within easy reach. In the shadows of an overhanging cliff, 3 more men were barely visible. 5 altogether, Jenkins whispered. More than the boy saw. Xander nodded, studying the men through his field glass. Recognize any of them? Jenkins took the glass, focusing carefully. 2 work for Blackburn, he confirmed. Don't know the others. Xander adjusted his position for a better view. The 3 men in the shadows had moved slightly, revealing their features. His blood ran cold as he recognized one of them, a tall, lean man with a distinctive scar across his chin. Marcus Cole, he muttered. Friend of yours? Jenkins asked. Far from it. Cole had been one of Reeves' most loyal men, a killer with a reputation for cruelty. That he was here, working with Blackburn's men, couldn't be coincidence. We've seen enough, Xander said, backing away from the ridge. Let's get back to the ranch. What about the cattle? One of the hands asked. They're not going anywhere. We'll return with more men. The ride back was tense, Xander's mind racing with implications. Cole's presence confirmed his fears his past had caught up with him. But the collaboration with Blackburn suggested something more complex than simple revenge. At the ranch, he reported their findings to Williams, including his recognition of Cole. It's no coincidence he's working with Blackburn's men, he concluded. Someone told him where to find me. The sheriff, Williams suggested, possibly, or someone else in town. Xander's expression was grim. Either way, they're using the rustling as cover for something bigger. Me, Williams said bluntly. Blackburn wants my land. If these men are as dangerous as you say, they might not stop at stealing cattle. I need to leave, Xander said suddenly. My presence here puts you and your men at risk. Running won't solve the problem, Williams countered. These men have found you once, they'll find you again. And I'll still have Blackburn to deal with. The old rancher's calm assessment gave Xander pause. He'd been running for so long that it had become his default response to danger. But Williams was right, running would only postpone the inevitable. What do you suggest? He asked finally. We face them, Williams said simply. On our terms, not theirs. The plan they developed was straightforward: increase security at the ranch while gathering evidence against Blackburn and his associates. Williams would ride to the territorial capital the next day to request assistance from the federal marshal, while Xander and the hands would maintain vigilance. And if Cole or his men make a move before you return? Xander asked. Williams' expression hardened. Defend what's ours. But try to take prisoners if possible. We need testimony to bring Blackburn down legally. That night, Xander wrote a brief letter to Josephine, explaining that ranch business would prevent their meeting on Saturday. He didn't mention Cole or the danger. There was no need to worry her unnecessarily. One of the hands would deliver it to town the next morning. Sleep eluded him as he considered the situation. Cole's presence changed everything. The man was ruthless, capable of extreme violence, and held a personal grudge against Xander for testifying against Reeves. If he was working with Blackburn, it suggested a level of planning and resources that was deeply concerning. And then there was Josephine. The thought of her being caught in the crossfire was unbearable. Perhaps it would be better to end their association now, before she became a target. Yet the idea of never seeing her again created an unexpected ache in his chest. Dawn found him exhausted but resolved. After seeing Williams off on his journey to the territorial capital, Xander organized the remaining hands into defensive positions around the ranch. The cattle were brought in from outlying pastures, guards posted at strategic points, and ammunition distributed. Expecting an army? Jenkins asked as they checked the rifle positions. Better prepared than surprised, Xander replied. The day passed tensely but without incident. As dusk approached, Xander was in the barn when he heard a horse approaching at speed. He drew his revolver, moving to a position where he could see without being seen. The rider was Josephine, her face flushed from hard riding, her expression anxious. Xander holstered his weapon and stepped into view. "Joe, what are you doing here?" She dismounted quickly, her movements urgent. "You're in danger, all of you." She glanced around nervously. "Is there somewhere we can talk privately?" He led her to the foreman's cabin, aware of curious glances from the hands. Once inside, she paced anxiously, her usual composure absent. "There were men in the saloon last night," she began without preamble. "3 of them. They were asking questions about you, how long you'd been at the Williams Ranch, if you ever mentioned your past." She stopped pacing, facing him directly. "One had a scar on his chin." "Marcus Cole," Xander confirmed grimly. "You know him?" "Yes." He gestured for her to sit. "How did you find out about this?" "I overheard them talking to Sheriff Peterson." Her expression was contemptuous. "He was very cooperative, especially after they passed him a purse of coins. They mentioned something about taking care of unfinished business tomorrow night." Tomorrow night. When Williams would still be away. The timing wasn't coincidental. "You rode all this way to warn me?" he asked, touched by her concern despite the gravity of the situation. "Of course I did." She looked at him as if he were being deliberately obtuse. "I couldn't just let you walk into a trap." Xander moved to the window, scanning the darkening landscape. "You shouldn't be here, Joe. These men are dangerous, so I gathered." She rose, joining him at the window. "Who is he, this Cole?" Briefly, Xander explained his history with Reeves and Cole, including his role in their downfall. Cole swore he'd kill me if he ever found me, he concluded. Now he has. And he's working with Blackburn. Josephine's expression was thoughtful. That can't be coincidence. No, my guess is Blackburn hired him specifically to deal with me after our confrontation in the saloon. Cole's reputation would make him an attractive option for someone willing to resort to violence. What will you do? The question echoed Williams from days earlier. This time, Xander had an answer. Stop running, he said quietly. Face them. Alone. Alarm colored her voice. Xander, that's suicide. Not alone, we have good men here and we're prepared. He turned to her. But you need to leave, now, before dark. It's not safe for you to be anywhere near me. I'm not leaving, she said firmly. Not when I could help. This isn't your fight, Joe. Isn't it? Her chin lifted stubbornly. Blackburn threatened my uncle, tried to force me into his bed, and now he's hired killers to murder a man I care about. That makes it very much my fight. A man I care about. The words penetrated his defenses, warming something long cold within him. Still, he couldn't risk her safety. It's too dangerous, he insisted. Life is dangerous, Xander. Her gaze held his steadily. Especially out here, we all make choices about what dangers we're willing to face. She stepped closer. I've made mine. Before he could respond, Jenkins knocked urgently at the door. Rider coming, he reported when Xander opened it. Single man moving slow. Xander grabbed his rifle. Get inside, he told Josephine. Stay away from the windows, she nodded, moving back as he joined Jenkins on the porch. Through the gathering dusk, they watched the approaching rider, a single figure slumped in the saddle, moving at a walk. Doesn't look like a threat, Jenkins observed. Could be a trick, Xander replied, raising his rifle as the rider came within range. That's close enough, he called. Identify yourself. The rider stopped, raising one hand weakly. Help, a faint voice called. Please. As the figure swayed in the saddle, Xander recognized William's horse. With a curse, he ran forward, catching the old rancher as he toppled from the saddle. Blood soaked William's shirt, his face gray with pain and blood loss. Ambushed, Williams gasped as Xander and Jenkins carried him toward the house. 5 miles north, Cole and his men. Inside, they laid him gently on a couch. Josephine immediately tore strips from a clean tablecloth for bandages, while Jenkins sent a hand for the ranch's rudimentary medical supplies. How bad is it? Xander asked, cutting away the blood-soaked shirt to reveal a gunshot wound in William's side. Bad enough, Williams admitted through gritted teeth, but I've had worse. Josephine examined the wound with surprising competence. The bullet went through, she reported. That's fortunate. We need to clean it and stop the bleeding. For the next hour, they worked to treat William's wound. Josephine directed their efforts, her city education including enough medical knowledge to be useful. By the time they finished, Williams was unconscious but breathing steadily. He needs a doctor, Josephine said, washing blood from her hands. But moving him would be dangerous. And town is too far, Xander added. We'll have to do our best here. They moved to the kitchen, leaving Jenkins to watch over Williams. Xander poured coffee for both of them, the routine task a welcome distraction from the gravity of their situation. What happens now? Josephine asked, accepting the cup gratefully. Cole knows Williams went for help. The ambush proves that. He'll assume his plan is exposed and move quickly. Xander's expression was grim. I'd expect an attack tonight. How many men do you have? 8 capable hands, including Jenkins and myself. He met her gaze directly. It's not enough, Joe. Not against Cole and Blackburn's men combined. Then send for help, she suggested. The miners at Copper Creek would come. They have no love for Blackburn after he tried to claim their water rights last year. It was a good idea, one Xander hadn't considered. It's worth trying, but even if they come, it might not be in time. Then we work with what we have. Her calm practicality was remarkable. The ranch buildings are defensible. We have ammunition, and we have supplies. They don't know that Williams made it back or that I'm here with warning. You shouldn't be here at all, Xander said, though with less conviction than before. Yet here I am. She reached across the table, taking his hand. I'm not leaving, Xander. Not now. The touch of her hand was like an anchor in a storm. For years, he'd carried his burdens alone, convinced that solitude was the only way to atone for his past. Yet here was this remarkable woman, offering not just her help but her heart. Joe, he began hesitantly, if I survive this, I can't promise you a future. My past will always be there, always be a danger. I know. Her eyes held his, unwavering. But I'd rather have uncertain days with you than safe ones without you. It was the most direct declaration either of them had made, acknowledging the growing feelings between them. Xander found himself at a loss for words, humbled by her courage and clarity. I don't deserve you, he said finally. That's not for you to decide, she replied with a small smile. Now, shall we prepare for our visitors? The preparations were swift and methodical. Jenkins organized the hands into defensive positions while Xander and Josephine assessed their resources. Ammunition was distributed, positions assigned, and a simple system of signals established. One of us should ride for help, Jenkins suggested as they finalized their plans. The miners might not come in time, but the town might. The sheriff won't help, Xander reminded him. Not the sheriff. The townspeople. Jenkins' expression was determined. Blackburn isn't as popular as he thinks. If people knew he was attacking Williams' ranch, many would come. It's a long ride in the dark, Xander said doubtfully, and whoever goes might run into Cole's men. I'll go, Josephine offered. I know the trails, even at night, and they won't be looking for me. No, Xander and Jenkins said simultaneously. Be reasonable, she countered. I'm the logical choice. You both need to be here to organize the defense. And as a woman, I can move more freely. They'll be watching for armed riders, not a woman alone. Her argument was sound, much as Xander hated to admit it. After further discussion, they agreed she would take a different route back to town, avoiding the main trail where Cole's men might be watching. As she prepared to leave, Xander pulled her aside. Be careful, he said, his voice rough with emotion. If you see anything suspicious, anything at all, turn back. I will. She looked up at him, her expression a mixture of determination and fear. You be careful, too. I expect to find you alive when I return. Yes, madam. He attempted a smile, then, yielding to impulse, drew her into his arms. She came willingly, her body fitting against his as if made for him. When he kissed her, it was with the desperation of a man who might never have another chance. She responded with equal fervor, her hands gripping his shoulders tightly. When they parted, both breathless, she touched his face gently. That's a promise to keep, she whispered. I'll hold you to it. I'll be waiting. He helped her mount, adjusting her stirrups with hands that weren't entirely steady. Godspeed, Joe. She rode out into the darkness, a shadow quickly swallowed by the night. Xander watched until she was completely out of sight, then turned back to the ranch. There was much to do before Cole arrived. The attack came just after midnight, a coordinated assault from multiple directions. Gunfire erupted from the darkness, bullets thudding into the ranch buildings as men sought cover. 8, maybe 10 of them, Jenkins reported as they crouched behind the barn wall. Coming from the north and east. Keep your men down, Xander ordered. Let them waste ammunition. We'll wait for them to get closer. The strategy worked initially. The attackers, expecting a panicked response, continued firing into the darkened buildings. When they received no return fire, They began to advance cautiously across the open ground between the pasture and the ranch yard. When they were within 50 yards, Xander gave the signal. Rifles cracked from strategic positions around the ranch, catching several attackers in a deadly crossfire. 2 fell immediately while others scrambled for cover. "Hold steady," Xander called to the defenders. "Make every shot count." The battle settled into a tense exchange of fire, neither side able to gain a decisive advantage. The attackers had superior numbers, but the defenders had better positions and the advantage of familiar terrain. For nearly an hour, the stalemate continued. Then, during a lull in the firing, a voice called from the darkness, "Daniels, I know you're in there, you backstabbing son of a bitch, Cole." Xander signaled for the others to hold their fire. "What do you want, Cole?" "You know damn well what I want." Cole's voice was harsh with hatred. "You put Reeves in a noose and left the rest of us to scatter like dogs." "Reeves was a murderer," Xander called back. "He killed innocent people. You all did." "And you were any different?" Cole laughed, the sound ugly in the night. "Your hands are as bloody as mine, Daniels. You just turned yellow at the end." The accusation stung because there was truth in it. Xander had been complicit in Reeves' crimes for years before finding his conscience. "That's why you're going to die tonight," Cole continued. "You and everyone in there with you. Blackburn wants this ranch and I want your head. We both get what we want." Xander exchanged glances with Jenkins. The mention of Blackburn confirmed their suspicions about the collaboration. "You won't take this ranch, Cole," Xander responded, "and you won't take me alive." "We'll see about that." The firing resumed, more intense than before. One of the ranch hands cried out as a bullet found its mark, and Jenkins cursed as he dragged the wounded man to safety. "How many of them are still out there?" Xander asked as he reloaded his rifle. "At least 7, Jenkins reported grimly. "And we're down to 6 with Williams out of commission." The odds were worsening. Xander knew they couldn't hold out indefinitely. Their ammunition was limited and the attackers seemed well supplied. "We need to change the game," he muttered, scanning the battlefield. Cole and his men had taken positions in a rough semicircle around the main ranch buildings. Their gunfire was focused on the house and barn, suggesting they believed the defenders were concentrated there. "Jenkins," Xander said suddenly, "can you and your men keep up a steady fire from here? Make them think we're all still in position." "Sure, but why? I'm going to circle behind them." Xander checked his revolvers. "If I can take Cole out, the others might lose heart." Jenkins looked doubtful. "That's a big risk. We're running out of options." Xander clasped the older man's shoulder. "If anything happens to me, get Williams and the others out through the back trail to the high country. They won't follow you there." "What about Miss Keating?" The question twisted something in Xander's chest. "Tell her." He paused, uncertain what message could possibly be adequate. "Tell her I kept my promise as long as I could." Jenkins nodded solemnly. "Godspeed, Daniels." Xander slipped out through a small side door, using the shadows and his knowledge of the ranch layout to move undetected. The night was cloudy, the darkness an ally as he circled wide around the attackers' positions. From his new vantage point, he could see the men clearly, 8 figures spread out in a loose formation, firing at the ranch buildings. Cole was easy to identify, his tall figure distinctive even in the darkness. Xander drew closer, moving from shadow to shadow with the stealth of a man long accustomed to danger. When he was within 20 yards of Cole, he paused, considering his options. A shot would alert the others immediately. He needed something quieter. Decision made, he closed the distance silently, drawing his knife rather than his gun. Cole was focused on the ranch, unaware of the danger approaching from behind until Xander's arm locked around his throat, the knife pressed against his ribs. "Call them off, Cole," Xander hissed in his ear. Now. Cole froze, recognition dawning. Daniels, he choked out, the knife restricting his breathing. You always were a sneaky bastard. Call them off. Xander increased the pressure slightly, drawing a thin line of blood where the knife bit into Cole's side. And if I don't? Then you die first, Xander promised. And I'll take as many of your men with me as I can. Cole seemed to consider this, then laughed softly. You won't kill me in cold blood, Daniels. You had your chance in Denver and couldn't do it. That's why Reeves died and I walked free. The taunt hit its mark. Xander had indeed testified only against Reeves, not against all his associates. It had been a compromise with his conscience that now seemed misguided. I've changed, Xander said coldly. Last chance, Cole, call them off or die right here. Before Cole could respond, a shot rang out from somewhere to Xander's right. Pain exploded in his shoulder, the impact spinning him away from Cole. As he fell, he saw a figure emerging from the darkness, Blackburn himself, revolver still raised. I told you I'd handle this, Cole shouted angrily. You were taking too long, Blackburn replied coolly, and it seems I arrived just in time. Xander struggled to rise, his wounded shoulder screaming in protest. His knife had fallen when he was shot, but his revolver was still holstered at his hip. Don't move, Blackburn ordered, aiming at Xander's head. I've waited a long time to see Williams Ranch fall. Tonight I get what I want, and so does Cole. The law will come for you, Xander said through gritted teeth. This won't end here. Blackburn smiled thinly. The law in these parts is amenable to reason. And reason suggests that a gang of rustlers attacked Williams Ranch, killing the old man and his hands. A tragic business, but not uncommon in these dangerous times. You won't get away with this, Xander insisted, trying to keep them talking while he assessed his options. His shoulder burned with each movement, but the wound wasn't immediately fatal. I believe I will, Blackburn replied confidently. Now, shall we finish this unpleasant business? Cole stepped forward, drawing his own revolver. He's mine, he said to Blackburn. That was our agreement. Blackburn shrugged elegantly. By all means, just make it quick. We have a ranch to burn. Cole grinned, the expression feral in the darkness. Not quick, Blackburn, not for this one. He leveled his gun at Xander. I've been dreaming of this moment for 2 years, Daniels. 2 years of planning exactly how I'd make you suffer before you died. Xander tensed, preparing for what might be his last, desperate move. His hand inched toward his revolver, knowing he might get only one shot before Cole or Blackburn killed him. Then a new sound cut through the night, hoofbeats, many of them, approaching rapidly from the direction of town. Cole and Blackburn turned toward the noise, momentarily distracted. It was all the opening Xander needed. He drew and fired in one fluid motion, his bullet taking Cole in the chest. The man staggered backward, surprise registering on his face before he collapsed. Blackburn recovered quickly, firing at Xander, who rolled desperately to avoid the shot. Pain lanced through his wounded shoulder as he came up firing, his second bullet catching Blackburn in the arm. The rancher cursed, dropping his weapon as riders burst into the clearing, townspeople from Winslow, miners from Copper Creek, all armed and shouting. Blackburn's remaining men, seeing the tide turn, began to scatter into the darkness. Josephine had succeeded. Relief washed over Xander as he slumped back against a tree trunk, suddenly lightheaded from blood loss. He watched through increasingly blurry vision as the townspeople overwhelmed the last of Blackburn's men. Xander! Josephine's voice seemed to come from very far away. He tried to focus as she knelt beside him, her face pale with fear. Oh God, you're hit. Not too bad, he managed, though the evidence suggested otherwise. You came back. With help, she confirmed, pressing something against his wound to staunch the bleeding. Half the town volunteered when they heard what was happening. Mr. Ellis from the general store organized the miners. Her voice was steady, but her hands trembled. "Stay with me, Xander, please." "Not going anywhere," he promised, though darkness was encroaching at the edges of his vision. "Cole, dead," she reported, glancing at the still form nearby. "Blackburn is wounded but alive. The sheriff is with him." "Sheriff?" Xander's confusion must have shown on his face. "Not Peterson," she clarified. "The territorial marshal arrived in town just as I got there. He'd received reports about Blackburn's activities and came to investigate. The coincidence seemed too fortunate to be true." "Williams?" Xander asked, fighting to stay conscious. "Alive. The doctor's with him now." She touched his face gently. "Rest, Xander. It's over. We won." As darkness claimed him, Xander felt Josephine's hand in his, an anchor to the world he wasn't quite ready to leave. Recovery was slow but steady. The bullet had passed through Xander's shoulder without hitting bone or major blood vessels, a fortunate outcome that the doctor attributed to the devil's own luck. William's wound was more serious, but he too was healing well. His iron constitution and stubborn will to live proving stronger than the trauma he'd endured. Josephine divided her time between the saloon in town and the ranch, where she tended to both wounded men with equal care. Her presence was a balm to Xander, who found himself looking forward to her visits with an eagerness that surprised him. The territorial marshal, a grizzled veteran named Harrington, took statements from all involved. Blackburn, facing multiple charges of attempted murder, rustling, and conspiracy, had been transported to the territorial prison to await trial. Several of his men had turned state's evidence in exchange for leniency, providing details of Blackburn's operations that ensured he would spend the rest of his life behind bars. "You're a lucky man, Daniels," Marshal Harrington observed during one of his visits to the ranch. "Cole had quite a reputation. He's been wanted in 3 territories." "Luck had little to do with it," Xander replied, nodding toward Josephine, who was changing William's bandages across the room. "I had help." Harrington followed his gaze, smiling slightly. "So I see." He lowered his voice. "I've reviewed your file from Denver. Your testimony against Reeves was instrumental in bringing him to justice." Xander tensed. "That was a long time ago." "Not so long." Harrington studied him thoughtfully. "The Federal Marshal Service has been considering offering you a position. Your experience with Reeves' operation would be valuable in pursuing similar gangs." The offer was unexpected. "I'm not a lawman, Marshal. You could be." Harrington shrugged. "It would officially close the books on your past, a fresh start with the law behind you instead of after you." A fresh start. The words echoed in Xander's mind long after Harrington had departed. Was such a thing possible for a man with his history? As summer faded into autumn, life at Williams Ranch settled into a new rhythm. With Blackburn's threat removed, the neighboring ranchers became more cooperative, sharing resources and helping each other prepare for winter. The rustling stopped entirely, and the cattle thrived in the abundant late-season grass. Xander's shoulder healed, leaving a new scar to join the collection on his body. Williams recovered more slowly, but was soon well enough to resume limited duties around the ranch. Their shared ordeal had deepened the bond between them, creating something akin to the father-son relationship Williams had lost years before. And then there was Josephine. Their relationship had evolved naturally in the aftermath of the conflict, growing deeper with each passing day. They spent evenings talking about everything and nothing, sharing dreams and fears with increasing openness. Xander found himself looking forward to these conversations more than anything else in his life. One crisp October evening, They sat on the porch of the foreman's cabin, watching the sunset paint the western sky in brilliant hues of orange and gold. Williams had retired early, leaving them alone with the peaceful sounds of the ranch settling for the night. "Marshal Harrington offered me a job," Xander said, breaking a comfortable silence. "As a deputy U.S. Marshal." Josephine turned to him, surprised. "When?" "A few weeks ago." He hadn't mentioned it before, uncertain of his own feelings on the matter. "Are you considering it?" Her tone was carefully neutral. "I am." He met her gaze directly. "It would mean a new start. My past officially forgiven, a chance to use what I know to do some good." She nodded slowly. "Where would you be stationed? That's the thing." He reached for her hand, a gesture that had become familiar and precious. "Harrington mentioned a need for marshals in the Arizona territory. I could be based in Prescott, maybe even Winslow eventually." Hope flickered in her eyes. "You'd stay in Arizona." "I'd stay near you," he corrected softly. "If you wanted me to, if I wanted." She laughed, the sound catching on what might have been a sob. "Xander Daniels, I've wanted nothing else since the day you stood up to Blackburn in my uncle's saloon." Her admission warmed him like nothing else could. "I've been running for so long, Joe. From my past, from myself. I wasn't sure I had the right to offer you a future." "Oh, Xander." She moved closer, her hand coming up to touch his face. "Your past is part of who you are. I don't want you despite it. I want all of you, including the man who made mistakes and found the courage to atone for them." "I've got too many graves behind me," he whispered, voicing the fear that had haunted him for years. "Too much blood on my hands." "Then let me be your future," she said simply. "Let me be what you look toward instead of what you're running from." The words struck him with the force of revelation. Here was a woman who saw him clearly, all his flaws, all his sins, and chose him anyway. Who offered not absolution, which he had no right to expect, but acceptance, which was perhaps what he had needed all along. "I love you, Josephine Keating," he said, the words emerging with surprising ease. "I think I have since that day by the creek. I love you too." Her smile was radiant in the fading light. Enough to face whatever comes next together. When he kissed her, it felt like a promise not just to her, but to himself. A promise to stop running, to face the future with the same courage she showed every day. The following spring brought changes to Winslow. The railroad construction progressed steadily eastward, bringing new settlers and opportunities. Murphy retired, turning the saloon over to Josephine as planned, though he remained in town, enjoying his well-earned rest. Williams had recovered fully, the ranch prospering under his and Xander's combined management. Xander had accepted Marshal Harrington's offer, dividing his time between his deputy marshal duties and the ranch. The work suited him, challenging but purposeful, a chance to use his knowledge of the criminal world for good rather than ill. On a perfect May morning, Xander and Josephine were married in the small church in Winslow. The town turned out in force for the celebration, which continued well into the evening at Murphy's saloon, now renamed Keating's, though everyone still called it Murphy's out of habit. Williams had given them a wedding gift of 10 acres of ranch land and helped them build a modest but comfortable home. It stood on a rise overlooking both the ranch and the distant town, with a view of the creek where they had first begun to know each other. "Happy?" Xander asked as they stood on the porch of their new home that first evening, watching the stars emerge in the deepening blue of the sky. "Completely." Josephine leaned against him, her head resting on his shoulder. "And you? Any regrets about staying in one place?" "Not one." He kissed the top of her head, marveling at how natural it felt to have her beside him. "For the first time in my life, I'm exactly where I want to be." She smiled up at him, her eyes reflecting the first stars of evening. "Welcome home, Xander Daniels. Home." The word had never held much meaning for him before, not since his childhood in Texas, before violence and vengeance had set him on a dark path. Now, with Josephine beside him and a future stretching before them, he understood its power. He had buried his past, not by running from it but by facing it. The graves behind him would always be part of his story, but they no longer defined him. Instead, he looked ahead to the woman who had become his heart, to the community that had accepted him, to the life they would build together. And for a man who had once believed he deserved nothing but solitude and constant flight, that future was more than enough. It was everything. 10 years passed swiftly. Winslow grew from a frontier settlement into a proper town, with a school, a bank, and even a small hospital. The railroad connected it to both coasts, bringing goods and people at an ever-increasing pace. The Wild West was gradually becoming less wild, though the spirit of independence and possibility that had drawn settlers remained strong. Xander and Josephine's home expanded as their family grew, first with the arrival of their son William, named for the old rancher who had become like a grandfather to the boy. Then with twins Sarah and Thomas 3 years later. Their modest house became a home filled with laughter, learning, and love. Xander continued his work as a deputy marshal, earning a reputation for fairness and effectiveness throughout the territory. His past with Reeves, once a source of shame, became an asset in understanding and anticipating criminal behavior. Several dangerous gangs were brought to justice through his efforts, making the territory safer for all its inhabitants. Josephine transformed Keating's saloon into a respectable establishment that served as the social center of Winslow. She added a small library section where books could be borrowed, organized community events, and provided a gathering place that welcomed all respectable members of the community, regardless of background. Old man Williams lived to see his 90th birthday, surrounded by what he called his extended family: Xander, Josephine, their children, and the loyal ranch hands who had stood with them against Blackburn and Cole. When he passed peacefully in his sleep that winter, he left the ranch jointly to Xander and Jenkins, with instructions that it always remain a place where honest work was valued and second chances were possible. On the 10th anniversary of their wedding, Xander took Josephine back to the creek where they had shared their first real conversation. The cottonwoods were larger now, the wildflowers just as abundant in the spring sunshine. They spread a blanket on the grass, unpacking a picnic much like the one she had brought that day long ago. "Remember how nervous you were," she teased, handing him an apple, still his favorite. "You could barely look me in the eye." "I was terrified," he admitted with a smile. "Not of you, but of what you made me feel." "And what was that?" She leaned against him, as comfortable in his presence as he was in hers after a decade of partnership. "Hope," he said simply. "You made me hope again when I thought that part of me was dead." She kissed him softly. "You've given me far more than I gave you." "I disagree." He took her hand, the gesture as natural as breathing after so many years together. "You saw me when I was invisible, believed in me when I'd stopped believing in myself." "We saw each other," she corrected gently. Two people who didn't quite fit the world they found themselves in, who recognized something in each other that no one else could see. They sat in companionable silence, watching the creek flow past, listening to the birds singing in the trees above. So much had changed in 10 years, yet the essential truth of their connection remained constant, a foundation upon which they had built a life neither could have imagined alone. "No regrets?" he asked, an echo of the question he had posed on their wedding night. "Not one," she replied, smiling up at him with the same clarity and directness that had first captured his heart. "Every step that brought me here was worth taking, even the painful ones." As the afternoon sunlight filtered through the cottonwood leaves, dappling the ground with shifting patterns of light and shadow, Xander reflected on the journey that had brought him to this moment. The trail of graves behind him hadn't disappeared. Nothing could erase the past entirely, but they no longer defined his horizon. Instead, he looked forward, to the woman beside him, to their children growing into themselves, to a future still unfolding with possibilities. He had been a cowboy with too many graves behind him, and she had offered to be his future. Together, they had created something neither could have built alone: a life of purpose, joy, and deep, abiding love. A testament to the power of second chances and the courage to embrace them. And for a man who had once believed himself beyond redemption, beyond happiness, it was more than enough. It was everything he had never dared to dream of, and everything he now knew he could never live without.